Hello, welcome to a new untitled comics podcast. My name's James. If you two would like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Connor. You might know me from DC Comics Podcast.
And I'm Andrew, and you might know my work as a cartoonist. I've published a couple comics, Tales from the Border, and I'm working on a graphic novel called Ruins.
Aim of this podcast, I think, is for us just to discuss comics, not anything specific, not anything. We're not necessarily reviewing things. We're just going to be rambling about comics as an art form that we enjoy, and see where we go. Hopefully, you enjoy listening to us. If not,
What are you going to do about it?
yeah.
I was going to be a lot more explicit, but never mind.
So yeah, I thought we could start off saying how we all discovered comics.
Okay. Anyone want to go first?
Well, yeah, I can go first.
You're the professional in the room, after all.
Yeah, I got into comics at a really young age. I think it was probably about 5 or 6 was when I started reading comics. But before that point, I'd been watching a lot of like the kind of 90s Marvel cartoons and stuff, like particularly the Spider-Man cartoon. And then when I was 5, I had been living abroad and moved back home to the UK at that time, and went to a local library and came across the Elseworlds Batman Dracula graphic novels.
My library had a copy of that.
Yeah,
I think every library did.
Kelly Jones' artwork, and that just completely like absorbed me completely. And I think it was also my intro to like kind of gothic horror as well, and kind of in terms of another separate route. And I think being at that library and getting that out, and like what were some other ones, the Tim Sale Batman kind of Long Halloween books, and there was like an Elseworld. There was a lot of Elseworlds books at this library, which is hilarious because I don't think the Elseworlds books are that good actually, outside of some of the Batman ones. But all of those books there, and it kind of really got me into more the artwork than the characters. I don't know if I was quite reading yet. I was quite late to learning how to read, and then eventually comics kind of became a way into learning how to read, and it's been a chaotic love affair ever since, I'd say.
Interesting you started with such, relatively speaking, notable titles.
Yeah, well, also quite adult titles, and I think if my parents had looked inside some of those Kelly Jones comics, there's no fucking way that they would have let me go home with those books. But, you know, it's that stuff that kind of kicked me in that direction anyway, you know?
Yeah. That's fun. As for me, when I was really young, I did read like the odd comic here or there. My grandparents got in like the Beano. It's something that I don't think I'd even consciously remembered that I read until not that long ago. And just like these memories started coming back to me. It's like, oh yeah, I did occasionally read that while it was there. And then I remember being, so that must have been, maybe somewhere in the range of 5 or 6, maybe 7.
Yeah.
When I was a bit older, maybe 9 or 10, I remember reading, again, from local libraries, there was like the Simpsons comics, and there was a graphic novel adaptation of The Hobbit that I remember reading.
Go out there.
Yeah, I've never gone back to it. I don't want to ruin the memory.
The artwork is phenomenal, I will say.
That's good.
I remember the time period where that graphic novel adaptation of The Hobbit was like in every Articus / Waterstones up and down the country.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. It was everywhere. I remember that. But then I don't think again that's like I was saying, maybe 9 or 10, and then I don't think I really touched comics for years after that point. I didn't really jump back in, and then I jumped into single monthly issues around the time of DC's New 52. So that's 2011, I think.
Yeah.
I was in college at the time, and I walked past a comic store to get home. It was the only store in the city I'd never been in, and I didn't know that DC had done this initiative recently. It wasn't something I was aware of. I wasn't, I was reading maybe the odd thing here or there. Like I think I'd read like Batman Year One at this point, something like that. But I just thought, I'm going to go in on my way home one day and see what's in there. And I picked up one of the early issues of Scott Snyder's Batman.
Oh yeah.
And and I picked up a couple of other things, but that was the one that stuck with me. And then that was it. I was basically a weekly customer from there. Wednesday Warrior as it is.
That would have been around the time we all started talking online
Yeah.
as well. New 52 and
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would have been around that time. Yeah.
Because we all started on that, wasn't it? Like a fan page for a podcast at IGN or something. And
Yeah.
An IGN one, yeah.
that ended, and then that got filtered into several other groups before it kind of ended up in Mild Fuzz, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole history of those groups, isn't there?
That is something pretty unique about the internet, isn't it? The channels of you can go through, going forums, message boards, Facebook groups in this case, the chains that you can follow.
Better come with them.
Oh yeah, they have their own complete cultures and societies that you can only know from the inside.
Yeah. It's like whenever you join a new meme group and you're like, I've got no fucking clue what's going on here. Like
every time.
You know, several weeks in, and you're like, I kind of start to understand this now.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, I'm one of them.
Or my favorite thing from recent years is the notion of the who is today's Twitter protagonist.
Oh yes.
Like who is Twitter about today? Or like you can always tell if someone is as aggressively online as you, as if you can mention feral hogs or Bean Dad, and they know what you're talking about. Like,
yeah, it was
I'm not really on Twitter, but I was obsessively reading it just over a week ago when all the stuff about Army Hammer was coming out, because I was like, I can't sleep on this.
How can you look away?
Too good. I've got to read all of it.
I noticed I was aggressively online when I was scrolling through Twitter just a few days ago, and there was a video I was watching. It was a guy basically doing like a little thing with himself about how he can't sleep and this is his brain going on.
Yeah.
And he got to the end, and he burst into the sea shanty that was going around on TikTok, the main one, and I burst out laughing. And my girlfriend, who isn't really on any of these things, had no idea what was going on. I didn't understand why I was finding it so funny, and I was like, "Yeah, I guess I'm on the internet a lot."
Yeah. Well, you see, I've got no understanding whatsoever of TikTok, but I work in a school as a librarian and as a TA, and all of the kids at the school are massively on TikTok, and I don't get it. Yeah. And today I was in with Year 7s, kind of looking after vulnerable and key worker kids, and one of them just started, basically had turned my last name into a TikTok dance song, and for the whole day, whenever I kind of looked across the room to make sure everybody was doing their online learning, she'd start like dancing at a seat like this, and doing Mr. Stay Low, like, and it's the weirdest thing ever.
That's so TikTok is a strange place that I don't understand. I only know what is filtered through Twitter, basically.
Same.
I only see the stuff that ends up on the rest of the internet where they're like, look at how weird TikTok is. I've
accepted. I'm too old for TikTok.
Yep.
But I appreciate what I see through Twitter. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable in the knowledge that I probably will never have TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess back on track. My first experience with comics would have been like when I was a kid and we'd go on holiday. I'd always buy whatever Commando comics.
Commando, yeah.
Because they'd come out every fortnight. I think it would be 4 issues would come out, like 4 different Commando books with a different story in each one. And at the time, they were like 20 pence a comic. Like,
so why not get them all?
Yeah. They eventually went up to 50p, but
how dare they?
They were truly the Fredo of the comic book world.
It's interesting that you mentioned Commando because as part of my general path towards being a unemployed comic book artist, basically, is that I did a master's in Dundee at Dundee University, and Commando is published by DC Thompson, who also publish Beano and Dandy and all that, and that's all based in Dundee. And so I've had many conversations with like the editors of Commando, and several of my friends have contributed scripts to Commando now as well.
It's a distinctly British comic. in the
Yeah,
same
and it's not really something where
2000
there is a kind of parallel to it anywhere else in the world in quite the same way that Commando is.
That's kind of true for a lot of British comics in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. I think like
I mean,
the American comic market doesn't really have a Beano, for example, does
No.
it?
well, let's think of a long running. If you think of a long running British comics,
Mm,
Commando, Beano, Dandy, but one of those doesn't run anymore.
mm.
I
I think
Yeah.
it's Dandy doesn't run anymore.
Is it Dandy?
Yeah,
I think
Dandy.
so.
Yeah. There is 2000 AD,
Which is probably the one that most international listeners will be
Yeah.
familiar with.
and
Yeah.
then there's the Doctor Who strip
Yeah,
Yeah.
from Doctor Who Magazine Monthly. They are the longest running British
yeah.
comics.
It's
Yeah.
crazy because like one of the things I studied when I was doing this master's is like history of British comics, particularly. Obviously being in Dundee, it was something that was so historic in the city. There was a big focus on it at the university. I think at one point in the 70s and 80s, there was more comics being made in Britain than in America. Because there was more diversity in publishers, and
Yeah.
in terms of international talent, British comics really was getting the cream of the crop. And I think
Doesn't surprise me.
following basically the collapse of the British comics industry in the 90s by none other than Walt Disney. Once I kind of refamiliarize myself with the history, I'm sure we could do a whole episode on that. But like basically following that, 2000 AD and Doctor Who are the only things that really stuck around, along with Beano and Dandy. And you have all
it's
these
worth
other
saying that
strips that
Doctor Who is
yeah,
literally a strip inside of a full magazine.
exactly, yeah. And it's like I think it's only something now that like in the last 5 years we're beginning to appreciate the history of British comics in Britain again. Because like I know Rebellion have got their kind of Library of British Comics line that they're putting out stuff every now and then, and they're digging that stuff up that's never been reprinted. And I'm sure is that Trigon,
Yeah.
or whatever it's called. Yeah,
Trigon, I think. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, that's a Rebellion reprint.
Rebellion,
Which again is something that was 2 pages inside an educational magazine, every week.
I think because British comics is very much a serialized, short
Yes.
things inside larger wholes. But
yeah,
I think probably one of the most impressive things in publishing is Doctor Who went off air in 1989.
Yes.
that's
They
what I
had a
got.
movie in 99.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
98,
And it
99.
came back on telly in 2005.
Oh, that's very nice.
That is nice art.
This is like a nature comic published in like a girls' comics magazine in the 70s, I think.
Yeah. Well, this one, for anyone unfamiliar, it's all basically. Let me just see where I am on my own screen. It's Roman Empire, but in space.
Right.
Is very much the concept here, which is how it got away being published in like an educational magazine. I think.
Yeah.
Is it was so heavily influenced by Roman history that it was like we can get away with this. It's gorgeously painted though.
I was going to say like for that period then where there was no Doctor Who on air, they managed to keep on publishing a magazine about Doctor Who consistently, monthly.
Yeah,
It's
a lot
an
of good
impressive
writers
feat.
on it as well, right?
Pardon?
With a lot of good writers contributing as well. Like I know Grant Morrison did a couple issues and stuff like
Alan
that.
Moore's done some, although
Yeah.
Alan Moore's would have been when Doctor Who was still on.
Yeah.
TV.
I think that's the big thing. You mentioned that there's obviously such a rich history in British comics, and we were publishing that much in like the 70s. I think internationally it's just seen as we're the export market of talent rather than content.
Yeah.
And that there are a lot of British. You just mentioned Grant Morrison and Alan Moore there, probably 2 of the most famous, but huge cultural exports in terms of talent. But no one outside of the UK has really read a lot of their British work.
It's the British invasion, isn't it?
Yeah.
That period where Callum Burgess basically came to the UK, grabbed all our talent, and took it to Vertigo.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think like as much as that was brilliant and obviously changed the face of British comics of comics, international comics forever. I think there's also a bit of a sense of tragedy that as a result, the people who could basically rebuild the British comics industry went abroad,
Yeah, it's one of those things that we'll never know because don't get me wrong, they're obviously all talented, incredibly talented writers, some of the best ever seen.
I think,
but who knows if they had stayed here and done this, would they have hit the popularity that was needed to rebuild
Did the
that.
market even exist for them to do that?
It's the cultural draw of capes as well.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Like British and American culture are so.
When it comes to pop culture, definitely there's a lot of because we absorb so much of their stuff. They absorb less of ours, but still a reasonable amount. Like obviously Doctor Who's one of the big examples.
It's that love of superheroes and potentially wanting to write for the superheroes.
Yeah.
But the British Invasion does take me to my second experience with comics growing up.
Please, let's hear.
It was going to the library and finding out they had a massive selection of Vertigo comics. I was probably about 11, 12 at the time.
So probably just a little bit too young for most of them, but screw it.
But it was reading Sandman. That is how I discovered both Neil Gaiman and Sandman. And a lot of other Vertigo stuff that was being put out similar time. Books of Magic, a lot of stuff from Pat Mills. All this kind of Vertigo, 90s Vertigo work.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a binge of that over the last, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I worked through all of Sandman and did all of Lucifer as well.
I still need to finish Sandman. Like, I kind of, my Vertigo moment was when I was like 14, 15. And it was like Sandman and Swamp Thing, more so Swamp Thing. And a few other titles. I think Preacher as well, which I did finish recently. And I think there is something about being that age, 14, 15, and you're reading this stuff that obviously has a more like there's more care taken in the construction of it as like a piece of art, right? That it feels more novelistic, it feels more literary, but at the same time, you've still got superheroes on every page, and it's the version of what you were reading when you were 5 or 6, but kind of amped up for adults. And it's always interesting, I think, to see whether that appeal sticks around when you find yourself being the age of the writers who wrote those things,
That takes I always forget who it was, but somebody used to write for one of the major comic sites before they all imploded. As now we don't have comics journalism. But
really?
I mean, there's some people trying to bring it back, but there isn't any major site you can point to and go, oh, that's where you go for comic.
I remember Comic Book Resources used to be great, and now it's just like, I don't know what happened in the last 5 years.
And that's most of them. Newsarama was good until like a year ago when they got bought out by Games Radar, and now it's just fluff.
I find Comics Journal is really good, but like that will kind of, by the very fact that it's published by Fantagraphics, will kind of privilege, indie kind of auteur comics rather than the mainstream stuff, which is great if that's what you're into, and I very much am, but like it's not going to give you an industry overview.
There's a monthly magazine called Panel X Panel, which is very good. There is comics journalism out there, but there isn't.
It tends to be individual people doing their thing, their own blog sites, for example, rather than this is the website you go to.
You basically, if Bleeding Cool is the son of comics journalism,
I love that.
Which it is.
Yeah.
You need the opposite end of it. You need a comic broadsheet.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know what the listening demographics to this are going to be like. I don't know how many are going to be international, but in case you haven't figured yet, this is going to be a very British show.
I mean, to be fair, Bleeding Cool is British.
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah.
And I think that is why it is run like a tabloid, because there's a lot
knows what he's doing with it, yeah.
Tabloid inspiration going into it.
Yeah.
I have complex feelings about Bleeding Cool.
I mean, to be honest, like that and Comic Book Resources got to the point where I think like a couple of weeks ago I unliked them on all my social media because it's just like this deluge of stuff that is like theories and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's frustrating with Bleeding Company because obviously Rich is the editor and his guy who started it all.
Yeah,
seems like a pretty reasonable person for the most part.
Yeah,
but
there are times where you see what he's doing and you're like, yeah,
but it is like you say, he's taken that tabloid model and run with it, and I don't think it's like an accidental like, oh, he's done this or that. I think it's very intentionally this is how he believes it will be successful, and make money, and not in a malicious way. As like, this is how he makes a living. I can appreciate that. I don't think there's a malicious intent with most of it, and I do think, like I say, he comes across as a pretty reasonable person most of the time. But also some of the shit he publishes.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I don't, for a momentary parallel to this, like, it's one of the things I really struggled with, liking Game of Thrones when it was at its peak, was all the kind of fandom stuff on the internet of like theories and all this sort of stuff. And, I kind of got so inundated with all this shit being sent my way that I just didn't care. Like, at the end of the day, all I wanted to do was sit down and watch the show, right? And I feel like that about comics a little bit, and the kind of top 20 sexiest X-Men or whatever, and things like this, and you're just like, the fuck are you talking about?
CBR
like,
is full of.
But do you know what I mean? It's like that sort of mentality, in some ways, I think, is what gives a bad look to comics in the mainstream. Is that people see shit like that and think, comics is not going to be is the toilet of culture, and the opposite is true.
Clicking on. It's the mainstream driving those clicks that has caused sites like that to become.
Yeah.
Popular. I mean, comics and superheroes, I don't think are even remotely. And obviously, comics are a lot more than superheroes, which I think is. I'm not sure how much time we will spend on superheroes and on other things on this show. I am a fan of superhero comics, but you spend a lot of time, Connor.
I am a co-host of a DC Comics podcast, which on Twitter is just at DC Comics Podcast, by the way. Of like, well over 200 episodes at this point. It's like 5 years. So it's hard to say that I'm not a fan.
The desk with it now, or...
a little bit. It is every week. Right? Okay, this is my stack of DC comics. I have to make sure they come out on Tuesday now. It used to obviously Wednesday. They come out, and then I've got to make sure they're all read by the Saturday, when we record. And I can't read anything else that I need to until after I've done those. I have to prioritize the work, essentially, even though they're not always what I'm most looking forward to.
That is endlessly fascinating. The shift to Tuesday.
It is a very interesting move.
Is that because of Diamond or Brexit or both? Or
no, it's DC
bookstores.
Yeah, it's DC physically trying to reshape the comic industry.
So, if you're not familiar, traditionally speaking, if you buy a trade, any sort of paperback, comic, not the single issues, the actual books, they come out in comic stores. I think it was a week earlier than in bookstores.
Yes,
because they came out in comic stores on the Wednesday, and then they would come out in bookstores or Amazon the following Tuesday. What DC have done is when they broke away from Diamond, they used this excuse to do it. Is they shifted their day to Tuesday, which means there's no longer a week delay. They basically bumped it all technically forward, I suppose, when it comes to the book publishing, so that they hit comic stores and bookstores on the same day. So there is no disconnect when it comes to their marketing. Yeah, so they can market one set date rather than okay, well, it comes out in October, but you've got two different dates depending on where you're going to buy it from.
Yeah,
because for a long time, at the big two at least, DC and Marvel, DC has understood the power of trade paperbacks in bookshops way more than Marvel.
It's to a point where for regular comic readers it has been frustrating. Because DC, they space out their trade releases a lot more, which means because they don't want to flood the market with them, basically. The book market specifically, they don't want to flood, but it means that you're often a lot further behind the monthly issues than Marvel are, which are usually, within a couple of weeks of the last issue of the trade,
you've got it.
The Marvel trade is published. Whereas DC, you can be 5 or 6 months behind at points, depending on the book.
What Watchmen and Vertigo books are what taught them this.
Yeah, pretty much.
I forget who. Oh yeah, it was Tom King said in a tweet recently when they were asking about why Strange Adventures is going to bi-monthly. And he's like, because this is a book that will sell in bookstores for years to come, and we want to make sure the art is consistent.
Yeah.
Basically, we can't put this is an evergreen book, so it needs to be.
That's the reality of it. And it's probably the right call. I mean,
It's why
one,
my
it's the
playbook
right
for
call
this-
as a story because it's better to have the consistent artists.
Mm.
Two, you're not rushing your artists to death, so that's always nice.
Yeah.
Three, like I says, the vast majority of people who read this book will read it as one single, book
Yeah.
later rather than 12 single issues over a year or more in this case.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to cater to them more.
I mean, this is something that like I find really interesting, and I'll speak from my own personal experience of as a writer illustrator here, but like, I'm always blown away by any of these artists who can keep up with like the Jack Kirby kind of schedule of, what even just one book a month, because I've been writing my graphic novel now for 2 years, and it's looking to be 6 chapters, 200 pages, and it's taken me pretty much since the first lockdown last year to illustrate 31 pages of 37 pages. It will be the first chapter.
Yeah. Whereas you do have some artists that can do a page, some even do 2 pages a day, and it's like, and not at a low quality level either. I'm talking, obviously there are some that can rush out at a lower level and do more, but I'm talking still being at a high quality level. You have artists who are like, no, a page a day, I can do that 5 days a week, no problem, and that will be their standard, and that's very impressive.
It is.
It's one of the things I think drives the kind of look of American comics, is that I think a lot of, especially Marvel and DC, although I think a lot of them have had shifts in that recently, the sort of like homogenized look that a lot of the comics have. Is,
house style, we talk about it as.
The house
because
style.
they tend to be
go for consistency rather than kind of unique quality.
They tend to be different from each company. Like I can point and go, that's a Marvel house style, and that's a DC house style. Like DC house style tends to be in the vein of Jim Lee, or it was until very recently anyway. Literally in the last like 2 or 3 years, maybe this is shifting. But for the most of the last decade, it was Jim Lee-esque.
Yeah,
it's also why when you get artists that are distinctly not that house style, it hits you twice as hard, kind of.
Yes, they really stand out when they do choose to publish someone of those styles. Yeah, you notice it a lot more.
You know what? Those are the stories that we remember as readers. Like right. Like Batman Year One, Long Halloween, Mr. Miracle, and all that sort of stuff. Is like those comics that depart from the house style and try and do something that you can read in not one sitting, but you have Mr. Miracle and you've not read any other New God stuff, and this is your Moby Dick kind of thing, and you can read it without having read anything else, and it will be, as you say, that kind of evergreen experience.
And
those are the stories that we remember.
That will sell in bookstores for
Mr. Miracle will sell for decades. Yeah. And I think I mentioned that because that's the most recent one of these that we're talking about.
I'm going to be controversial here, by the way, and say I actually didn't like Mr. Miracle at all.
Whoa. Okay,
I bounced off it twice myself.
I loved it.
I'm not sure I'm a big Tom King fan.
I got after 7 issues.
I go in and out with Tom King. I have I'm not really enjoying his Batman Catwoman. I didn't enjoy the back half of most of his Batman run. I thought Heroes in Crisis was absolutely terrible. I couldn't finish it. But Strange Adventures, I'm loving. Mr. Miracle, I'm loving. I recently read Vision, and I think that's probably my favorite Tom King work to date. So
as well.
I read it all in one sitting when I had no PC recently, and it was just like, oh, this was fantastic. So I definitely, he's not the standout writer that he is for me for he is for others, but when he hits, he really hits for me.
Do you guys remember Earth One? Earth One.
How can I forget? They're still publishing those.
Yeah.
The Earth One graphic novels, yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, the Green Lantern one came out not that long ago.
I still remember reading Superman Earth One and being so disappointed.
Well, that was an early experiment of DC to hit that book market. The original aim behind Earth One was they'd create one for near enough every character, and every 6 months to a year, a new volume.
Yeah, I think the original plan was to have 3 to 4 a year spread across different characters, so that every like once a quarter you'd go in and there would be the next Earth One, but the scheduling obviously killed it.
Sell them and shift them as novels.
I actually have an interesting story about one of the Earth One artists, which I will share.
Please do.
I can't remember his name, but it's the artist who drew Superman Earth One books 1 and 2.
Shane Davis.
Shane Davis, yeah.
Became a
So it's
gatekeeper,
interesting. We
I
haven't really
believe.
heard from him in a while at DC. I can't remember the last thing that he's published.
No, he went down the Comics Gate hole, I believe.
Right. So I met him at a signing for Superman Earth One, and I think you guys know this. I used to live in New York, so I this is when I was living there, and I went to Midtown Comics for the signing, and he was 3 hours late to the signing, and arrived, and he was like sweaty as shit, looked really kind of gross actually, and he was like, I'm here, you know, we're here," and so we all got in line, and you know, I was waiting in line on my book. I think I'd read it at that point and was like disappointed, but I also thought, you know, there's an opportunity here to meet an artist, and
You're here, might as well.
yeah, and I think I had like a copy of the comic that I'd self-published at that point when I was like 14 and didn't know any better, and I thought, you know, maybe I'll give it to him and see what he thinks. And so I'm in the queue, and there's this guy ahead who obviously has some sort of like kind of mental disability, and or like learning difficulties of some kind, and he's got like this verbal tick, and he goes up to Shane Davis and like is really excited to meet the guy, like just like wonderfully like excited, and he's like, oh my god, I love this book so much, you know, where did the idea come from with the villain? I think he's such a cool and unique villain, and was like having a really kind of intense conversation with Shane Davis about the villain as he paid Shane Davis to like draw the sketch. And I was a couple people back from it, and I was watching it, and I was like, you know, this is really touching that this guy has such huge respect and love for Shane Davis as an artist, and all this. You know, I was really kind of taken aback. I was like, that's going to be the best memory of the day. You know, is hearing this guy talk about how much he loves the work, that passion. And then he finishes up and says, "Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you." And he takes his book and leaves. And as soon as he's out of earshot, Shane Davis mocks the verbal tick that he has, and like does like the Donald Trump impression of whatever disability this guy has, and everybody in the line and at the shop joined in and started laughing. And I remember standing there and feeling like my skin crawl. I was like, this guy is not a good guy. You know, this guy, if you're going to make fun of somebody who A, obviously has some sort of disability, and B, did nothing but rain praise down on you and your work. Do you know what I mean? Like, that takes a certain level of arrogance, and I've never bought anything that he's done since, because
I read the first two Superman Earth ones.
Yeah.
I never read the third one, but the
third one was the best one, I thought.
Oh, I was out by that point because they were just terrible. Right. Those first two, I kind of hated them.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Yeah.
And I don't remember having particularly strong feelings about the art in it. I think I remember it being fine. Like it was more story conceptual problems I had rather than anything specific with writing dialogue or all the story.
He can't draw heads. I've noticed this now. Anytime you see he's drawn a head, it looks like there's half of it missing at the back. Like he, you know, if the face is straight on, that's fine. But if it's at like 3/4, like the head is missing.
I know Kenneth Rockfort does this as well.
Yeah, and it really bothers me whenever I see it.
And it annoyed me once I noticed that, because I actually really like Kenneth Rockfort's art. I think it's quite nice.
Same.
Until I noticed that, and I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah, you can tell it's somebody who learned to draw by reading comics and watching and copying people in dynamic poses, as opposed to going to a life drawing class and realizing actually the head is, you know, that way is quite big. You need more.
It's longer than you think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
So, yeah, you heard it first. Shane Davis is an arsehole. I mean,
breaking news.
Apparently, he went into Comicsgate, which I had no idea about, but it doesn't surprise me.
My original intent of we'll be a super positive podcast.
Yeah. If you want something positive, I think it's pretty notable that all of our origin stories, so to speak, involve public libraries.
Yeah.
And
I'm carrying that forth as a librarian at my local school.
I think that maybe British librarians were really good at stocking comics.
Yeah, I used to volunteer in my school library. I did that for a couple of years, and had a surprisingly reasonable comic section. I do think, like I say, that there is a reasonable collection. I think a lot of it as well is I think the British public are reasonably good at donating old comics to libraries because it's so easy to just donate to a library. It's often the easiest way to get rid of books, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Or at least it was in the before times when people could accept donations. But like, if I want to sell them on eBay, I've got to go through the hassle of doing that for usually very little return, unless it's a very specific book. If I want to donate it to just a generic charity shop, I've got to wait and get a charity bag from them and then go through their process. If I want to donate to my library, I tend to just walk down the street and drop them in, and they're very happy for them.
Yeah.
And I think that probably leads to a lot of stock in British libraries when it comes to comics.
I mean, I get about £2,000 budget to spend on books a year, so I have actually found when I took the job, I thought I'd be revisiting the comic section and basically throwing most of it out and restarting from scratch, because whoever was a librarian before me at this school had brought a lot of stuff like Captain Marvel's Secret Invasion, where if a 11, 12-year-old kid comes to the library and wants to read a Marvel comic and that's what we've got to offer, they have no idea who the male version of Captain Marvel is. They don't know what Secret Invasion is. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's too stuck in continuity. You need something that's easier to get them into. So my plan was to get rid of all the kind of stuff like that and get easy access stories that you don't need decades of mythology to do. But graphic novels are more expensive than books. So when I do have £2,000, I need to make that money, thing. And that doesn't mean I can buy a lot of graphic novels.
Marvel have started putting out. Marvel have recently started for characters that are more kid friendly, like Miss Marvel, Wasp, Miles Morales. They've started putting out thicker, smaller sized digests, where it's like 12 issues for £9 as opposed to being big. I think the aim of those is to let's get kids in with these.
You think Marvel are finally realizing the power of the bookstore, especially and in this case libraries, but I'm kind of lumping them in with that. When it comes to especially younger kids, where it's easier to grab them, because DC have been on that for a while. They've had a whole range for the last couple of years. I mean, it's been going back a few years with but even before that they had the DC superhero girls, for example. They've been and they've obviously been publishing the Hanna-Barbera stuff, the Scooby-Doo stuff for years.
They finally cancelled Scooby-Doo.
No, it's back. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's in the latest solicits. There's more. There's more. Yeah.
It was a new series of Batman / Scooby-Doo team up.
Yeah, but there was.
Yeah, I saw that as well. With the the Mazzucchelli Year One as the cover, right?
Yeah. It's the concept for that one is Scooby and the gang time travel back to Batman Year One period.
I mean, that's perfect. I could imagine Mazzucchelli doing like a Scooby-Doo comic. Like his art style would kind of fit that sort of era.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the main Scooby-Doo book, I think there was still an issue published in April 108 or something like that. If that was the last issue, it won't be long till there's more.
Yeah.
They won't leave it.
You know what? You both of you will probably disagree with me on this, but you know what I wish DC would finally finish is All-Star Batman. I want to see how that ends badly.
That was their attempt at Bookstar markets before Earth 1.
Oh my god. It's so bad, but it's like a glorious train
crash. It is. I would like to see it finished for curiosity's sake as well. Like, I don't think it's good. It is objectively not good.
Yeah.
Once you read it as a comedy and not as a Batman comic, it's great.
Probably, but it's a compelling mess to read for sure.
Yeah. Because I never read Holy Terror, the Frank Miller Holy Terror thing. Kind of stayed away from it, but I'm curious to read that and see how actually disastrous it is.
The announcement and release of Holy Terror, and I have read some of it, was the point where I was just like, yeah, I'm done with Frank Miller as a creator, I think.
Yeah, it's bizarre, like, because over the last few years he's built up it's Frank Miller, right? And just last year, in the first lockdown, I went back and read all his Daredevil stuff, and it's like, the man used to be able to write and draw, like, phenomenally well. Like,
Daredevil's still probably the best thing he's done.
Dark Knight 3 wasn't awful.
I think it might have been Doc Shaner or someone was tweeting about it the other day, saying it's really good and they really love the art in it. And I was like,
Yeah, I think was it
Huh.
the Golden Child one shot that they did with Raphael
Yeah, they did
Grandpa.
that recently, didn't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really want to read that because I'm interested to see the man who goes from Muslim hating, Islamophobic to Black Lives Matter trumpeting kind of anti-fascist that he seems to be now. It's an interesting journey.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Have either of you ever read any Duck comics?
What, the Scrooge Duck comics?
Yeah, like the Karl Barks or Dan Rosa.
I really wanted to read. Was it The Life and Times of?
Life of Times is fantastic.
Yeah, like my interest has been piqued by how many people rave about it, and I might sink the money in for the Fantagraphics.
It's potentially my favorite comic book of all time.
Oh,
really?
that's. I mean, I'd never had any particular interest in it, but that does get me interested.
In my top 5, for sure. Life and
Well,
Times.
this is what I hear. Like, I kind of had written them off being the Disney kind of Looney Tunes, whatever, thinking whatever, and then out of nowhere, all of these people who I know, and also others who are like notable comic professionals, being like, it's one of the masterpieces of the medium, and I'm like, I've got to check this out.
So he builds on. So Karl Barks wrote a ton of Donald Duck comics, and this was before Disney credited their artists. So it was.
Marvel is still quite bad at that, to be honest.
Yeah, it was. People came to know Karl Barks and referred to him as the good duck artist because his stories were always significantly better than anyone else's. And Fantagraphics have been slowly putting out for Karl Barks' library. Then years later, Dan Rosa started making Duck comics, and he was a big Karl Barks fan, so he built a lot of his stuff on the back of what Karl Barks had done. And part of his run on Scrooge and Donald was basically making a Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck as a biography.
Yeah.
And as a story, it's fantastic. But waxing lyrical about those wasn't my actual point.
Right.
Europe, particularly the Nordic countries. I went on holiday to Copenhagen a couple of years back, and what absolutely amazed me was you, like on the airport, you'd walk into like the newsagents or the newsagents in the city itself, walls of Disney comics, of Duck comics, Mickey as well,
Really?
but predominantly Donald Duck. But while America stopped publishing Disney comics, Europe never did.
Yeah, they kept going, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, like there's tons of Italian Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck comics that have never been translated into.
That's bizarre. You'd think it would be such easy money for Disney to because translating. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's relatively inexpensive once the comic's already done and drawn.
Occasionally found out like IDW was doing it for a few years recently.
Yeah,
that license seems to have dried up.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's to the point where there's experimental lines of Disney comics in Europe. It's crazy. But yeah, I just walk into these newsagents and floor to wall shelves of Disney comics. And
it's something I do wonder because obviously, even as Brits, I think we are culturally pretty ingrained within the American market of comics for the most part.
Judge Dredd is the only thing that we really keep to ourselves, and even that is a story set in an American hellscape.
Right, and I do wonder how many Americans realize how big the world of comics is beyond the American comics industry, because it does seem so all dominating when you're inside it.
Yeah,
it's like, I know in Japan it's like manga is such a wide. It is perfectly normal to be grabbing a manga and going and reading it on the train on your way.
Yeah,
home
and
after work.
I think some people overlook about manga, especially when we're talking about the direct market with comics. Again, in the American comics market, the release model is so much more accessible. Well, I mean, what you're looking at, $3.99 on a good day for 20 pages of comics in American comics.
Yeah.
Whereas you can go into the same store and pick up a monthly manga book for like $9 that has 200 pages. And of just a handful of different stories, the various parts of the next things. It's just like it's right, yeah, and do completely different genres, and it just seems baffling that the American market is so expensive in comparison, and it's probably why it's struggling to find new blood in the direct market specifically. Again, not count the bookstores.
The American direct market has got better in genres since Image had its big boom.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Again,
yeah.
Things like Saga leading the way.
Yeah, over the last 10 years or so, it's really.
I mean, I think it's interesting seeing when a lot of these creators who might have got their start at Marvel or DC have then left Marvel and DC and do the best work of their careers, at Image or like Boom or IDW or somewhere like that. And I'm thinking people like, I don't know, Darwin Cook, does New Frontier and a couple other DC things, and then goes and does Parker. Brubaker, obviously Ed Brubaker, starting with Captain America and Daredevil, and then he goes and does Criminal, and all of these artists, it does make you think, how limiting is Marvel and DC.
Right. I mean, I'm seeing just on your shelf behind you there, Black Hammer. Lemire, obviously.
I only read very recently, and I think
it's the best fantastic.
Jeff Lemire.
It's wonderful, and it's Black Hammer is so uniquely interesting in that for Dark Horse, it's clearly a replacement for Hellboy, and not in that it's hitting the same people. I'm not saying I think there probably is a reasonable overlap in audience, but it's not even the same genre really. Yeah. But more just the model that Hellboy was of.
Absolutely.
You had someone shepherding it with this vision, but you got other people involved, and all these various minis that do different time periods and all sorts of things in that universe.
It's the first time I've been excited about a superhero universe since Invincible.
And
Marvel and
that's what it is, and it's so. I mean, and it's so big, but I appreciate that like DC are completely playing ball with it. Like you had the Justice League crossover with it as well.
Yeah. That's one of the things. It's what I don't read any Marvel DC comics now, and it's not because I don't like them. I do enjoy them.
Yes, but you're going to read Harleen, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going to read Harleen. That's the Black Label stuff has been on my to read list, but a lot of it has been the fact that like if I want to read Superman, I've got to read 3 comics at the same time as well as Justice League just to understand what's going on. Whereas I love that with Invincible or Black Hammer, I can pick up one book.
I will say I think DC are. I mean, I can speak less for Marvel about this because I don't read as much, but DC are getting better at this, where books are becoming. There are not every book, but there are becoming less interconnected books. Where if you want this character, there is a standalone thing for most of the big ones now.
Like that, they're doubling down on anthologies as well. I know the price is going up to compensate.
But not directly proportionately. It's not like at the minute it's $3.99 for 20 pages. They're giving you 60 pages for $5.99, for example. So it's going up in a reasonable scale rather than just directly proportional.
Like I'm using, is it Infinite Frontier?
Yes, that's their new initiative. So obviously, you had New 52. Then after that, you had Rebirth, which was the big one, like 5 years or so ago, and then. Infinite Frontier is the next one that's starting in March, and that's the big kind of new initiative.
Surprisingly jumping back in for a lot of it. How long that'll last, I don't know, but I am.
It's been really interesting because right now they're publishing Future State, which is like a 2-month thing where it's.
I want to read the Swamp Thing issue.
It's. I would say it's one. I mean, personally, one of my least favorite Ram V issues. Even though it's still very good, and I definitely recommend it. But I think there are other Ram V works I would recommend more. Even other DC works, like I would recommend more.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
because I've only read Blue and Green and These Savage Shores, but I really enjoyed both.
His Catwoman issue was excellent.
He is the main writer on Catwoman and has been for, I think he did 3 or 4 issues before Future State, and he's continuing after.
Right.
Because I'm going to read all of Tinian's Gotham and Ram V's Catwoman. Well, it's Batman before jumping into.
I definitely recommend his Ramby's Catwoman. As of right now, it's very standalone, separate. I mean, all you need to know is the basic premise of, and this is almost going back a few years now. Is there was almost a marriage between Selena and Batman. It didn't quite happen. Kind of then maybe happened at the end of the run. Selena went off to a different city. to be on her own, work some stuff out for herself, and this is her return to Gotham. Basically, that's pretty much all you need to know. And it's then her setting up her own corner in Gotham, kind of taking on the various crime organizations that have taken over her area.
Yeah.
It's really good so far, but I mean it's early days. Like I say, it's there's not even a full trade out yet, but it's been really good issue to issue work.
Speaking of Ram V, however, comic book newsletters.
Ooh, and an art form I deeply love and is particularly nerdy even within comic book fandom.
And
I think
back to what we said earlier, even though journalism isn't the right word because they're being written by writers, and I don't think you can journalistically have. There should be a barrier between a journalist and
a creator.
Yeah.
That's in any industry.
I'm subscribed to the Brubaker one, the Chip Zdarsky one, and the Jeff Lemire one, but I haven't read any of Jeff Lemire's yet.
The Kieran Gillen one is always fantastic.
Yeah.
Classic. That's the one that got me started.
But he used to be a journalist, so
he understands the art of the written piece.
Yeah.
Like the back matter in, like, I'm a big fan of a phonogram.
Yes.
Of what, sorry? Oh, the comic phonogram,
It would be the other contender for my favourite comic of all time with Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, how should I read it? It's like, you could buy the trades. However, get the single issues on Comixology because then you get the back matter.
I love the main story of all the phonogram volumes. I love the story. Yeah, everything. It's wonderful. Gillen and McKelvey are my dream team on any book they're on. They're perfect.
I love the back matter and all the criminal books. Although I don't know if you've been reading that Texas Blood. The new what's his name? Jacob Phillips comics.
Oh, the new colorist.
He's drawing it, written by I can't remember the name of it, but the back matter in that I find incredibly self-indulgent and like.
And I love it when it's like that, though.
Yeah, I mean, we're a writer, and it's the story that we're telling. And thanks so much for joining us.
It's.
And I'm like, the story isn't that original.
I don't mind it when they're like that, as long as they talk about what they're doing with it after. Like, I think there is an art to it. Like, I was reading Graffiti's Wall, another Ram V book. I just read it the other night. And at the back, there's a little interview with Ram V and the artist whose name I'm completely blanking on. I can't see it from here. It's the one on the new book that he's just announced.
Until I get my phone charger, I'll be back in a moment.
And it's there's an interview at the back with the letterer, and to my shame, despite having been publicly reviewing comics for years, I don't think I quite understood lettering as an art form. It is. Do you know what? I'll just go grab the copy and get the names because this will be a lot more professional if I do that. So the artist was Anand RK. So there's that.
Frequent collaborators, right?
Yeah, they did. Obviously, this. Also, the artist on Blue and Green.
Yeah.
Which was the big recent one, and
something.
Yes, yeah, but the letter in this is Aditya Bidikar.
Yes,
I may be butchering that pronunciation. Yeah, but the back is like it's a couple of pages long. This piece about their lettering. It's not much in the grand scheme of things. It's just a 2-page thing.
But just seeing this lettering is fascinating. As somebody who really struggles with lettering, I got a lot of information from it.
Right, and this is what I was saying. I've been reviewing comics for 5 years now, and rarely talk about lettering because I didn't feel like I understood it properly. I understand. Okay, there's a bit about placement, leading my eye in the correct places, and fonts.
Yeah.
I get the basics, but not confidently enough to really critique it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But this here, it's someone because he hand lettered the whole book.
Right.
Kind of as a challenge, and he talks about what bubble shape we're going to use, how we're going to do the tails, what font we're going to use, how am I going to do it, how rounded am I going to be, how flowing, what's going to be the the juxtaposition, the and all the pacing of it, and and comparing it with like Darwin Cook's lettering, for example, he uses as one of the comparisons, and and the way his flow is, and it's it's like I said, it's only like 2 pages, but it is some of the best back matter I've read in a long time. It's worth the entire book for that.
It's a letterer that runs Panel X Panel as well.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
It's one of those things I really struggle with. One of the things I struggle with Marvel and DC in terms of the artwork is also the lettering, because I find a lot of it is very obviously computer generated, and a lot of it kind of sits on top of the artwork rather than integrating into it, and it makes you miss the writers and artists like Darwin Cook, who knew how to letter a page properly. And like, this is one, I don't know if you've read any Sergio Topi comics. I'm just getting the book out now. This is an Italian comic artist from like the 70s and 80s and 90s, who is probably the greatest comic artist that nobody's ever heard of. And it's all black and white, beautifully hand-drawn artwork. And the way that he integrates lettering on the page really kind of, it's not so much sitting on the page as much as it becomes part of the storytelling. And it makes you miss artists like this who knew how to letter properly.
I wonder if part of it with like DC and Marvel is obviously there's an editorial mandate in that, like some characters, most characters have their own established style, especially for narration boxes, where like Wonder Woman's is a red box with her yellow logo in the corner and yellow text. Like I think
Batman's has.
It's like grey and black. It's like it's just this is their established format that is consistent across all books, and I understand why they want that as a company. They want it to be recognizable to anyone at a glance who's talking, even if they're not really familiar with this book yet.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if that restriction is kind of what holds back a lot of letterers at these companies, and that they feel too restricted by the rules.
I think in that case you can say that about the writers and artists as well at Marvel and DC. Like, I think the works that we remember from those publishers are the ones where maybe they broke the rules or were published out of continuity, or were like more singular in how they approach the character and mythology. And it makes you wonder, like, what would a Batman book written and drawn by Adrian Tomine or Daniel Clowes look like? It would be weird, but it would be interesting to read.
I think DC are getting better at that. That's why they've got Black Label that. Is I know
that's the most excited I've been about DC in years.
In some ways, it's marketed as an adults line, and I guess it kind of is in that you've got a bit more creative freedom. But
it's a line designed to generate books of a bookshop.
Yes, exactly. Because there's even sub brands within the Black Label, like the Hill House stuff, which was run by Joe Hill.
Stuff, right?
Yeah. I think Joe Hill wrote 2 of the books, but I think there was maybe 5 or 6 in total that have come out of it so far.
Yeah.
And
it was pre Black Label, but Gerard Way's Young Animal imprint put out some amazing stuff at DC.
I really want to read his Doom Patrol run, because Morrison's Doom Patrol was one of my favorites.
I loved that first volume of his Doom Patrol. I haven't read the second one yet because of all the delays. I just left it.
Hauser's Mother Panic is the gem of the line.
Really?
Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, I hadn't read that one, but it is interesting just the restrictions that these companies have and seeing the creative freedom of some of the work around it. And like I say, Black Label, where you've got a lot more freedom to do different things. Like, just over the past couple of years in Black Label, for like some of the biggest examples, Harleen, which is Sejik's Harley epic.
I really need to read that, don't I?
It is possibly the best book DC published in the past decade.
I don't like him as an artist, and I've never liked Harley Quinn as a character.
I mean, if you don't like him as an artist, I'm not sure it'll change your mind.
Yeah,
but I mean,
he's a brilliant artist. It's just the digital style doesn't work for me as well as it does for others. It's a personal thing rather
that's
than
fair. That was a bit of a surprise book for us, because I know he does like Sunstone, and I think he has a few other like create your own little passion projects that are mostly crowdfunded. I believe, or even more specifically, I think it's like Patreon and stuff that he does a lot of it on. But I'd never read any of his stuff that he'd written, only seen his art, and it was like, oh no, this guy can tell a story as well. Like and it's, let's say, it's possibly the best book DC published in the past decade. On my other show, DC Comics Podcast, I'm the only one who was really a Harley Quinn fan before that, who liked various Harley Quinn books, to the point where one of the three of us actively despised anything with Harley and just kind of read it because they liked Cedric's art.
Right.
And also agreed it's one of the best books that DC have ever published in like the past decade. It's so good.
It's one of those things where I've seen his career from afar, and I've like a lot of like the jokey stuff with superheroes that he publishes on the internet I've seen. And even though his art style isn't necessarily for me, the thing I think he does so brilliantly, and I wish more artists would follow him in this way, is the way he draws gestures and like body language. Because like,
very expressive.
It's a whole way of storytelling that communicates so much more than writing does in a different way, you know. And those panels where he's able to get those characters to communicate through body language, you know, it enriches the reading experience because you're now reading it on several different levels.
I think that's why his Harleen is better than anything else he's done at DC, which, you know, I love a lot of the stuff he's drawn at DC. I think he did a bunch of Abnett's Aquaman run, which is the thing where I found him. It was fantastic, gorgeous stuff. But when he had free reign, because he was telling his own story, he wasn't interpreting, you know, someone else's script and you know, having that restriction, which again is pretty common. But this here where he kind of had free reign to do what he wanted from just, you know, whatever was in his head and put it out. I felt like, you know, he really got even more expressive and really told a lot of the story through that. It's a pretty wonderful book. But then on the other end of the scale, you know, you have Lemire and Sorrentino doing a Joker book that's kind of, it's not really a Joker book that much. It's almost a Fincher-esque thriller with Joker. Is kind of how I describe it.
I just watched Seven for the first time last weekend. Don't ask me how I hadn't watched it before. But after watching that and being blown away by it, I'm all up for like a Fincher kind of Fincher.
Yeah, it's that one. I would describe that one as like Fincher meets Lynch.
Oh, that sounds great.
and then if you want straight up, like just, you know, this is pure Fincher. You've got Joker Harley Criminal Sanity.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I did read the first issue of that, and it didn't grab me.
Yeah, I'm not as big on it either, but it is very much this is Seven, or you know, Zodiac as a Joker Harley comic. Like it 100%. That's what it is, and if that's what you're into, I can see the appeal of that book.
The one I really want to read of the Black Label is the Wonder Woman Dead Earth one.
So good.
I can't remember his name, but that
Daniel Warren Johnson.
Yeah, he's just phenomenal. I always get his work confused with David Rubin as well, and I always have to remind myself that they are not the same person because they've got similar art styles. But oh my god, his artwork is so incredible. I love how handmade it looks and kind of how heavy he is with the ink, so you can really feel
really scratchy and heavy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like I think as well, when you know, in the mainstream comics kind of world, we are so used to that very like thin line, that precision, that almost like in a lot of cases very digital look that, you know, a lot of artists will have because they're drawing on an iPad or a tablet or something. I love it when you see an artist go the complete opposite direction and do something that could only be handmade, you know, because there's so much organized chaos on the page.
Yeah.
So I will say before we call it, anything you've read recently you want to shout out to?
Ooh.
It's a good question. Let me just glance at my recently read. John, I will go with we've obviously mentioned Ramby a few times, so I'll mention something else. Actually, screw it. No, I won't. I'll go with Ramby, Blue and Green. It's fantastic. That was my first dip into his non-DC work.
Yeah,
and so good. But obviously, I've since then I've read these Savage Shores and Graffiti's Wall as well, and I mean, you can't go wrong with any of it, really. But yeah.
Earlier today, I read the first issue of Haha from Image.
Okay.
Which it's W. Maxwell Prince is the writer. I can't remember who drew this issue, but it's a different artist each issue. It's a mini-series about clowns.
Yeah.
Each issue will be a different one-shot about a clown.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting.
He's the same guy who did... I've not read it, but have you guys heard of Ice Cream Man?
Yes.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
The same writer, and that was one shots. This is the same principle, but it's a mini series about clowns.
Right.
And yeah, each the second issue is the artist is Zoe Thorogood, who recently
I know
published.
people who know Zoe Thorogood actually.
Yes, she recently published her first graphic novel.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Misadventures of something,
Yeah,
Billy something. I can't remember. Yeah.
British. She's British, isn't she?
Oh no, Impending Blindness or
Yes.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, she is British. Yeah.
Yeah. Second issue is by her, but each issue is going to be a different. This first one was about a clown who loses his job at a fun fair, and it was like
I don't know how I feel about this book. I don't know how I feel about clowns enough to want to read a series of them.
I had no idea what to expect, but I thought I'd take a go on it.
Mm.
And yeah, it was fantastic. I still love a good one shot. I think one shot is a dying
Yeah.
art.
I think
I
it's
completely-
transitioned to something Andrew's just picked up there, I believe, is transitioning more to the original graphic novel, which I think American big publishers
Well,
have finally realized there's a market for.
It's funny
Yeah.
that you kind of like mentioned what have you read recently, because I haven't actually read a comic in about 4 months now, because I was reading March, the March trilogy, and needed a break from it just as I started book 3, and I have a rule that I only read one graphic novel at a time. So I haven't allowed myself to read any more comics, and I've got a huge stack of books like Berlin by Jason Lutz and some other stuff that's building up. I'm like, I will love this when I read it, but I need to finish March first. I broke my rule once over Christmas to read Reckless, which I don't know. I think you both read
I
it?
almost picked that instead of a Ramsey book, and then thought I'll go with the other one. So I'm
This,
glad you
I
did.
just thought was because I mean, Brubaker and Phillips have been
They've been a power team for a while now.
for so long. Like, you'd think after 20 years of doing nothing but crime comics that they'd grow tired, and yet this still feels completely different from everything else they've done, because this feels more like a Lee Child thriller than it does, a straightforward crime story.
Aiming for.
Yeah, and I love how it how it visualizes and mythologizes like LA. No, Miami. Is it Miami or LA?
I think it's Miami.
Miami, sorry, yeah. And oh no, it is LA. It is LA.
Oh,
Both sunny cities.
Yeah,
it's because there's so much
Two very
there's so
different
much
places.
there's so much drug running in that book that I'm just like,
I
it
thought
could be
was
either.
Yeah, and that's that sort of like day glow neon kind of look that the book
It
has.
does, yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I've been meaning to reread it, but the best thing I've read this year, and I don't know how many people have read it, is The Borgias by Alejandro Jodorowsky and Milo Manara. This is absolutely fucking like phenomenal writing, and I think I kind of stayed away from Jodorowsky as a writer for a really long time because I'd watched some of his films, and a lot of people had recommended them to me, and I did not like any of them that I watched. I didn't like El Topo. I didn't like The Holy Mountain. It just wasn't for me. And I kind of got this image of Jodorowsky as like this dirty old man who thinks he's really revolutionary, which I still have that image of, by the way. But like, his comics writing is so much better than his filmmaking. And the writer I'd most compare him to is Stan Lee, and that he does these really condensed plots in quite
Didn't
short
expect that.
spaces.
No.
Yeah, I didn't expect it either. But like, in terms of how Stan Lee narrates a story, and Stan
Yeah.
Lee,
Well,
you absolutely can feel
Stan Lee
Jodorowsky's influence from
Do a
Stan
graphic
Lee
novel
there.
with Mobius.
But yeah, this is I won't open it because it's so pornographic. But this is absolutely phenomenal storytelling, and the artwork by Milo, it's fully painted in watercolors, and it really brings the history of it to life, of like Renaissance Italy.
How historical is it? Like, is it like how much creative liberty does it take? I guess is what I'm asking.
I can't answer that question. I imagine there's probably a little bit of liberty taken in the telling of the story, but it does match up timeline wise. Like, I don't think there's anything in here that doesn't have some sort of record.
Okay,
I can show you this page actually. But
found a
like,
safe one.
the artwork by Milo
That is,
Manara
yeah, that is gorgeous.
is absolutely phenomenal. And a lot of the enjoyment of the history comes from like how he visualizes Rome. So much of this I can't show if we're keeping this child friendly, because this is there's just so much on every page. But or maybe I can show that page. But yeah, like, in terms of bringing to life another period of history, this is probably the best historical comic that I've ever seen. Look at
Definitely
that.
something I'll have to look
That
into
is-
then.
That is some nice art.
Yeah.
And like, it's only how many pages?
I love the colouring.
It's
on
only
it, to be
216 pages, and you feel like you've read The Godfather, basically.
Really dense.
Yeah, it's really dense, and it moves along really quickly. Like, it was never tiring to read, you know. Because I really enjoyed the Incal when I read that, but that is tiring and that is exhausting, keeping track of how weird it gets. And then I read Meta Barons, which is a lot easier to understand, but is still, there's just so much of it. It's 600 pages long or something. So this was like a nice middle ground for me.
I said,
So
the
sorry,
reason
that was a
you
very
can't-
long run.
That's all right. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it's a podcast.
The reason you can't show many of those pages does bring us to my second recommendation.
Oh, let's hear
Oh.
it.
Money Shot by Tim Seeley, Rebecca Isaacs from Vault Comics.
Oh, yes, I've heard of this. I wanted to read it.
It's sci-fi. It's a sci-fi sex comedy. It's set in a future where Trumpian politics have kind of taken over and science can't get any funding. And these scientists have developed a way to go out into space.
Yeah.
But the only way they can fund it is by shooting porn.
Is this a spiritual successor to Sex Criminals?
I really like Sex Criminals as well, actually.
Me too.
But yeah, it's a 10-issue series from Vault Comics. It's finished now. And yeah, if you want a good laugh, it's definitely worth a.
I do like what I've read from Tim Seeley in the past, so yeah, I'm interested in checking that one out.
Vault
So I've been
a
bit hit or miss with Vault Comics. Like, I really loved These Savage Shores, and then the other one that I read, which I can't remember the name of, something in the Jewels. It was like a Southeast Asian epic fantasy with all female characters, and the artwork was by Audrey Mock, who drew a stint on Archie with Mark Waid. I love Audrey Mock's artwork, but I really didn't like that comic for numerous reasons, more to do with storytelling than anything else.
Vault have been getting better as well as the years have gone on since they started. They are a really exciting new publisher.
I believe it's Vault publishing that new Ram V book, right?
It is.
Yeah.
They announced a slew of creators at the end of last year that are going to have books this year with them. There's other stuff from them that I read. That's there you go as well. Giga, which is a mech story, but set in a future after the mechs have deactivated and people worship them as gods, and it's these
That's quite
people
interesting.
living
There it is.
in the shells of these mechs, basically.
That's interesting.
Sarah and the Royal Stars.
I like
That's the
Sarah.
comic. I read
liked
the first 6 issues and then cancelled my subscription.
Yeah, I enjoyed that book. I get where you're coming from with writing. It isn't the best writing in the world, but the artwork was enough for me to.
Yeah, that's the thing. I
story.
found myself. I love the artwork every issue, but the writing just wasn't doing it for me. And
I liked the plot and I liked the art. The scripting itself wasn't the strongest.
Yeah,
but it wasn't weak enough.
Yeah.
To overly dampen my enjoyment.
Yeah. Well, another thing I really like this year is I've found these on eBay. Something I've been wanting to read for years, but the trade paperback reprint, which is out of print, goes for like 70, 80 quid on eBay now. So I actually found the original issues of it, published in the 90s, were cheaper to get than the reprint. But it's the, however you pronounce it, Farford and the Grey Mouser comics from the 90s by Howard Chaykin and Mike Mignola, just before he does Hellboy.
Yeah.
These are really worth
pretty great. Yeah,
really worth
Chaykin's
chasing
the writer
down.
I don't tend to get on with.
I've never particularly liked Howard Chaykin either, but these are very, very faithful adaptations.
That's a whole discussion in itself, isn't it? Big writers that have large audiences that, for whatever reason, you just don't agree with.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all got some. There might be some overlap, but there's probably some
do
that
a trilogy of episodes, each one of us picking.
Yeah, there's very likely a writer that I hate, for example, but one of you absolutely loves. That That's a whole discussion to have at
I've
some
already
point.
I
got
know
one right
there's
to remind that
writers
has been
I
mentioned this
love like you.
episode that I think you two said that you really liked that I'm not a fan of.
Yeah. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Yep. But I think we'll call it there for our first
Yeah.
episode. Hopefully, you've got to know us a bit and our views on comics. This was a very rambly episode, but that's what we like.
A lot of fun.
Yep. Who
First
doesn't
time ever
like a good
recording a
ramble?
podcast, and I have to say I really enjoyed it.
It's good. Well,
Any thoughts for what our next episode could be about?
I got some ideas, but I'll throw them off air just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, bye everyone.
All right.
See ya.